Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another episode of Accelo Best Practice Webinars. Today we will be focusing on creating and tracking SLAs within Accelo. I'm your host Tom Ryan, I'm an account manager here at Accelo, and I am joined by my good friend and colleague Malin Duke, who is a customer success manager here who will be the primary host of this webinar. I will quickly just run through the agenda here, just at a really high level before throwing it over to Malin. Basically, we're just going to start with running through what is an SLA and why would you track it. And then, of course, kind of moving into setting up and tracking these service level agreements within Accelo and managing response times. And again, tracking and reporting on SLA violations. For those of you who have been to some of these webinars before, you're probably familiar with the Q&A section of Zoom. Feel free to throw any questions in there as we go. For those of you who are new, you can see it there as a Q&A option. We're going to have that open and hopefully answer things as we go. Of course, we will also leave a good amount of time at the end for any follow-up questions. If there's something we don't get to or we can't find the answer for you on the spot, we will, of course, follow up. But for now, I'm going to throw it over to Malin. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So hey, everybody. My name again is Malin. I'm a customer success manager here at Accelo, and we're going to be checking out SLAs today. So for those of you who don't already know, SLA stands for Service Level Agreement. It's something that a lot of you who work in the technical space are probably already familiar with because it's part of the offerings that you give to your clients as part of your support contracts. So SLAs can take a couple of forms. We're going to check out two of them today. The first one we're going to look at is for those agreements that aren't contractually obligated, where we just want to focus on improving our customer service levels by getting back to our clients in a more timely manner and keeping our team up to date on what needs to be addressed. Then we're going to build on that, looking at how we can start to institute more specific contractual SLAs, where we have specific obligations for specific clients, and how we can start to track which of our support requests and tickets have met those obligations and which ones have not. And then how we can quickly aggregate all those. So if we need to provide compensation to our client, if we need to provide a report, we can easily do that. So we're going to switch over now to one of our live systems and look at how all these are actually set up. So we're looking at a brand new Accelo account today. So we're going to look at how you'd start this process from the beginning. So any of you who have already set up ticketing processes or request processes, this will be very similar to how you got started. We'll just be building on how it starts off. Now for those two types of SLAs, the customer service goals and our contractual SLAs, these are actually going to be handled in two different modules in Accelo because they offer two different levels of specificity and date tracking. So the first one we're going to check out again is how we start to track these customer service goals. When we have specific timeframes that we want to adhere to respond to our clients. And we're going to set those up via the requests module. Now, if you haven't seen it before, requests is located here under the main menu, under the little inbox icon. And we use requests to take in your client's various support and sales inquiries. Now you can see we have one request already in here. And by the date, this one's a little bit old. It came in back in March. So we really want to get back to this client. Now, this type of customer service goal is one of the great ways to make sure that we don't forget about these because we can send ourselves reminders that we haven't yet responded to them. Now to set these SLAs up, we're going to be delving into the configuration side of your Accelo account. So similar to requests, they live under the main menu, down under configuration. And we're going to be looking at the configuration for our requests and those request types. Now, request types are used to track the different avenues which your clients might use to contact you. For most of us, we'll have two, potentially three different types. We'll typically handle your support address. So if you have support@yourcompany.com where clients email with questions, we'll track that. That's when we have set up. Some of the other common ones are having a sales address for new inquiries and then an accounts or billing address for your clients who have billing questions. Now, since we're focused on customer service goals with an eye towards support, we're going to start with the support type today. Now, you can set up different goals and different SLAs for each type of request. So if billing, for example, takes a little bit longer to get back to, you can accommodate that. So we're going to start with support. Now there are a lot of tools and options within each request type that are available for setting up how we take these in and how we respond to them. What we're going to be using to set up the SLA itself is one of the tools here called triggers. Now triggers is something you'll find all across Accelo. It's part of the sales module, part of company records, as well as projects, tickets, retainers, and even requests here. We're going to be using triggers to automate things within Accelo. Now that can take many different forms. That can be the automation of reminders, the update of the status of records, that can even be updating custom fields if there are specific details you need to track, which we'll actually see in a little while. Now to start with, we're going to be creating our very first trigger here to set a customer service goal for support. Now we haven't contractually committed to anything for our clients, but generally speaking, we want to make sure we're getting back to them. So let's say that we want to get back to our clients within an hour. Let's start up a new trigger to do just that. Now when we're creating triggers, we're again setting up automation in Accelo. And to do that, we're going to be setting up first the rules for when that automation should occur. These rules are used to define the specific situation for when the request has been received, how long ago, the status, and then we can even incorporate additional details like the type of company that submitted it. Once we've got our rules outlined for when that automation should occur, we'll then be setting up actions to tell Accelo what to do at that time. So our first step now is to give this new trigger a title. And we might even spell it correctly here to make sure our clients know what the heck we're talking about. Now that we have a title, let's set up our rules. Now the rule of thumb when setting up triggers is because they deal with automation and potentially email notifications, we want to be as specific as possible with these rules to make sure that we don't get them running in situations where we don't want automation to occur. Now we want a customer service SLA here to remind us if we haven't responded to a client for an hour. So let's set up the rules to do just that. Now the first part of that is identifying when we haven't yet responded to our client. And the system handily gives us a rule that helps us with that step to get started. We're looking at the status of the request. So the first thing we're going to look at is all of the requests that are still listed as pending, aka unanswered. Now because we want to be as specific as possible, we're going to add a couple of additional rules now to tell the system exactly what we mean by hasn't been answered for an hour. So let's add our next rule in. Now we've already told it what we mean by unanswered. Now let's tell it what we mean by having been at least an hour. When we're looking at these triggers, there are a lot of different categories of rules we can look at. Whether activity has occurred, specific fields for the request, even for the company. Now since we want to look at the lifetime of the request, we're looking at one of the request's fields. And we're going to look at the created date in this case. And so we've told the system now that not only do we want to be checking for requests that are still pending and haven't yet been answered, but also have been created at least an hour ago. So that way we can see if there's something that's been just sitting out there waiting for that amount of time. So we've got our rules now to define when that occurs. Let's save what we've got so far, and we're going to see a new option appear in this trigger. As we've added in our rules, the system will now allow us to set up the actions that will occur when those rules are met. So let's add in the action. Now again, we have a few different kinds of actions that we can include. There are a few here that are going to be helpful for those of you working in support who need to get things directly into tickets. We're going to check those out as well. The one we're going to be using right now, though, is to create an activity. Now, activities, if you recall, in Accelo are how we start to track your team's notes, their time entries, and of course, how we send emails. The idea here is to send ourselves a reminder if we haven't gotten back to a client. So we're going to send ourselves that email reminder. Now, because this email is going to be sent automatically, we now have the chance to template what that email's content should look like. And so we have the chance to identify here who should receive the notification and what it should look like. Now, because we want to make sure that the whole team has the opportunity to help out, some of us may be in meetings, we may be on site or on holiday, we want to make sure that it goes out to everyone possible. So we're going to send it on behalf of the account manager so they know that it's important. And then we're going to send it out to one of our recipients. Now, the way we set up recipients in Accelo, we have a couple of standard roles here for requests. So there might be our contact, that's the person who submitted the request to us. We have the company or account manager. We can also include directly individuals or groups of individuals simply by typing them into recipients. And we want to let the whole team know in this case. And then we simply include the email's content. The title is how we'll refer to this message in menus, so we know what we're looking at. And then the subject and body is what will appear in the actual email. Now, as we're adding that in, you may notice on the right here, we have a list of what we call merge fields. These merge fields allow us to include contextual information from the request we're being notified of so that the notifications have a little more information and you can actually take action based on them. So let's include a few of those. The first one we'll include is the ID of the request. It's always a helpful one if we're searching email later on or we're just wanting some indication of which one this is referring to. It's a great way to do that. And since we want to notify our team that something needs to be done, we're going to include a call to action in that subject. We'll let the team know that for request number, a response is needed. And down below, of course, we include a little more information to get that process started. Now, because these notifications go out of Accelo as emails, you're not necessarily going to be looking at Accelo when you receive these. So it's always helpful to include more information about who the client is that you're working with so that you can see who that is if you're just looking at your email. And the system conveniently reminds us that we need to include something called a fallback sender. That way, if this is a new client that perhaps doesn't have an account manager yet, we can make sure that it gets sent. And I'll send it on my behalf if no one else is available. Now our trigger's been set up. We have the necessary rules for when it should occur, and we have our action that'll send our email out. If we then go ahead and save this, we're all ready to proceed. All we have to do is turn our trigger on. Now, the way triggers work is by automatically monitoring that request inbox. So 24/7, Accelo will work in the background to check the support inbox to see whether there has been a new request submitted that hasn't been responded to yet for at least an hour. And if it does, it'll send us a notification of it. Now, these types of notifications or SLAs are a great way to try and improve customer relations by making sure that we're being responsive and attentive to our clients' inquiries. And it's a great way for those of you who don't have contractual obligations to improve that process. Now, for those of you who need to get back to your clients in a certain amount of time, who have SLAs built into your support contracts or your agreements, we're going to be looking at how we set up more specific SLAs and SLAs that have potential ramifications internally as well, so we can track which ones have been met and which ones have not. Now, to do that, we're going to be tracking these via what we call tickets. Now, in order to track the SLA for our tickets, we're going to want all of the necessary information about who submitted the ticket, when it was submitted, and how to all be tracked within the ticket itself. And as a result, we're going to need to set up requests here to actually bypass the request process, bringing all the information into one place so that we can easily keep track of these key dates and times. So to get the process started for our support SLAs, we're actually going to start here in requests. First step we're going to take is to turn off our customer service SLA because we have a more specific support one that we now need to track. And we're going to do that by creating another trigger. What this trigger will do is automatically convert our new requests into tickets so that we can keep track of everything there. Now, just like we did before for our customer service SLA, we're going to first need to give this trigger a title so we know what it refers to. And then we're going to set up our rules and actions to make sure that that's done. Now we want to be sure that every single request is converted into a ticket. So our default rule that looks for all requests that are pending or open at any point is actually just what we need. So we're actually going to save it. We don't have to make any changes to our rules. What we're going to do instead now is add a new action. And one of the options available here is that to convert the request. Now the options you see here are presented based on the menu called conversions. We'll look at that one in just a moment. It's on the previous page of request configuration. Now these can be used to convert your requests automatically into tickets, of course. They can also be used to turn them automatically into sales opportunities if you want to get your sales team started on inquiries, or of course your billing team started on inquiries as well. So we're going to get our conversion started just by, again, giving it a name. And there are a couple of important details to include here. The first is who will convert that on behalf of. We always need to have someone who that's being done on behalf of in Accelo, so that if any automation occurs and so that we can refer to when that was performed and by whom. Now the assignee is the person who will be assigned this new ticket by default. Because these represent new requests that are coming in from clients via your web portal or via email through requests, we're not necessarily going to know the person who should be working on them. So we're actually going to leave these unassigned to start with. And then we'll save our new trigger. And just like we did before, we'll turn it on so that it starts turning our requests into new tickets automatically. Now by setting that up, we've essentially made the requests module obsolete for our ticketing process. We'll no longer have to check the request inbox. We won't receive notifications for it. We'll instead work exclusively from tickets, or we can track the dates and times there. Now I mentioned as we were setting up that trigger that our options for converting requests into tickets were controlled by a menu called conversions. I just wanted to point that out here on the left under requests. This is where you can find all of the default options for converting your requests into new pieces of work, and where you can adjust and add your own. So now that we're turning all of our requests into tickets, we can start setting up our ticket SLA. To do that, we're going to start setting up new status progressions and new triggers for tickets. So let's head on down to configuration here to progressions. So here we have ticketing progressions. What we're looking at right now is how the ticketing process in your Accelo account proceeds. On the left here, we have the different types of ticket. These are great for tracking things like after-hours support, if you have requests coming in after 5 p.m. before 8 a.m. and for tracking the different kinds of requests you might receive. For example, on-site work versus off-site work. Right now we have just our standard default types from Accelo. And so we're going to use those to get started. And our first step is going to be simplifying that a bit by deactivating one of the types. We're just going to work with one today. Now in the center of the page, what we have are the statuses that we use to track our tickets. That lets us know where each ticket is at in the larger process. And so right now we're tracking tickets when they reach either an open, a closed, or a waiting status. A very simple way to look at tickets. We're actually going to be expanding these as we get started to make it a little bit easier to keep track of where we're at. And we track where we're at by using these progressions you see here at the top. These progressions represent the individual steps in your ticketing process. How tickets start with these available on create steps, how they move forward to potentially be marked as waiting or reopened, and how we eventually close them. So we're looking now at how we start to set up our ticketing SLAs. Now, there are two common milestones that you'll want to track with SLAs. The first is the resolution time. So if we have urgent tickets, for example, they often need to be resolved in a certain amount of time. The other, which we'll check out first, is again the response time, confirming for our clients that we've received their ticket and that work's begun in a timely manner. So let's start to track that one. Now, in order to track whether we have responded to our client and have started work, the first thing we're going to need is a new ticket status to know when we have not yet returned their question. So the first thing we're going to do to set up this SLA is add in a new status. Now these statuses are how your team are going to see tickets. It's how you'll categorize and report on them. And for those of you offering your clients the Accelo client portal, this is where they can see where the request is at. And so we'll give it a nice clear name so that both our team and our client know exactly what it refers to. This is still a new request that we have not yet responded to. Now the color is purely aesthetic. I always like a nice red one to remind me that I need to look at this. The standing is how we're then going to categorize these tickets under the hood. So whether we're treating these as having been opened already, or in this case, because it's a brand new request we haven't responded to, that they're still submitted and need a response. And lastly, of course, whether or not this could potentially be a starting point for a ticket. Now that gives us our new status. We have it down here at the bottom, and it'll let us start to build out our ticketing steps to keep track of them. So let's add in that new progression. This is how we're going to start our new tickets and keep track of when we have not yet responded to clients, and how we can then start to keep track of where we've met our SLAs. So we're adding that new progression, and we're simply going to drag the statuses around as needed. Now, if you haven't created one before, what we're identifying here is first when we could potentially use this step. When in the process does it come into play? Now, we can use specific statuses to say, for example, that only when we have an open ticket could we use this step. In this case, however, this is actually going to be a starting point. The new tickets themselves will be first listed as a new request. And so instead of using a specific status, we're going to use one of the options here at the top to make it a starting point, one of our options on create. And our second box here lets us know where that step puts us. So when we're creating a ticket, this lets us mark them as a new request. And so now we have a new potential starting point. Now, if we scroll up a little bit, we can actually drag these around. It's a great way to simplify things and order them as you're setting up potentially long and complex processes. So that's going to be our first starting point. Now, it is possible to have multiple starting points available, as you see we have here, so that if we have different situations arise, we can keep track of those. For simplicity today, though, we're going to kick out that extra step to have as clear and linear of a process for our team to follow as possible. Now we have a new starting point for tracking when we have new requests submitted that we have not yet answered. Now our next step is to have a place to track where we have answered our clients. And so we're going to add one more progression in. This is how we're going to move forward once we've received a new request and are starting work to move forward and open the ticket. And now we're going to use specific statuses. We'll drag the new request up. That's where we'll start. And since we'll be opening the ticket and responding to our client, we'll be marking it open. Now you can start to see through the list of progressions how these connect to each other. The from and to statuses should typically mirror up, so we can go create to new request to open. It's a great way to make sure that we haven't left any dead ends in our process. Now we do have other steps in there, but we're just focused on these first two right now because we want to keep track of where we've responded to our clients. Now that we have those steps, we can set up triggers to track whether we've responded to our client. So let's do that. We're going to come on down the line a bit to triggers. Now, just like requests, this is where we're going to start to automate where we're tracking these SLAs, what rules need to be tracked, and what should happen when they are not satisfied. So let's add in our new trigger. Now, for many of your clients, you'll often have differing SLAs depending on the urgency of the ticket and the type of work involved. So we're actually going to set up two levels of SLAs. The first is to track your critical tickets for where you have system outages or where clients need assistance immediately, and we need to get back to them a little bit sooner. We'll also then set up an SLA for tracking when we have more general inquiries that we still need to get back to in a timely manner, but may not need quite as quick of a response. So our first one is going to be for those urgent situations where we need to get back to our client immediately. So let's give it a name and get it started. This will be our system outage SLA. Now, just like we did before, we're going to need to set up our rules to define what we mean by system outage and when we need to be alerting ourselves. And then we'll set up our actions for what occurs when we break it. Now, since we're dealing with a system outage, the first thing we're going to want to look at is the priority level of the ticket. So we're going to be using a different rule here. This time we're going to be using the priority. Now, this is something that we can set when we create tickets. If your clients are submitting tickets via your client portal, they can note this for you as well, so that you have that information going into it. Now, the priorities here are something that you can rename and retitle to match the different branding options you give to your clients or the specific situations you want to track. By default, we list these as extreme or medium or low priority. You could always rename these to be, for example, system outage, critical priority, new user if you have a specific request that needs to be prioritized accordingly. And since we're dealing with an urgent situation like a system outage, we're just going to be looking at our extreme priority tickets. Now we know what the system outage piece of the SLA is. Our next step now is to define what we mean by what the SLA is. What is our target? What are we trying to track? Now for system outages, we're usually looking at a pretty quick turnaround time. So let's say we're looking at an hour. We need to get back to our client very quickly. So what we're going to do is add in two more rules in total. The first is to look at the status of the ticket. The reason we just set up those two statuses a moment ago is so that we could track just this. We're going to look now at when the status of the ticket is still a new request. We haven't yet responded to our client or gotten back to them. We haven't yet opened the ticket. Now, the big piece of the SLA, of course, is tracking how long that takes. So the second rule we're going to add, and actually the last one, is for tracking how long it's been. So this will be another detail from the ticket itself. And this time we're going to be looking at the submitted date. Now, when we set up our statuses, if you recall, we use something called the standing to group together and track those statuses. And they actually correspond to the dates that you see here. The submitted date is being tracked first because our first status is a submitted one. Our next status, however, that was open, was listed as an open status. And so that's where we'll be using dates like the open date. And since we're looking at a target now of a 1-hour turnaround and response time to our client, we're going to be looking for those that were submitted more than an hour ago. Now we have our rules set up correctly. The last piece now is to set up our action. Now with SLAs like these, where we have contractual obligations we need to track, an internal notification will of course be helpful because we want to remind ourselves that we need to get on top of these and hopefully do that quickly. But with these types of contractual SLAs, we're going to need an easier way to keep track of where we haven't yet responded to our clients so that we can provide reports internally into our client at the end of the month and end of the quarter, what was met and what was not met. Now, in order to track a new detail like that, we're actually going to save our trigger here, and we're going to go create a new custom field. So let's save this already. And we're going to head back to a new tool now. This is the custom fields area of the ticketing progressions. Now, custom fields lets us set up additional fields to track information unique to each type of ticket. So again, if we have different types of tickets for new user requests, for emergency support, for normal support, this allows us to set up specific fields to track information relevant to it. If we had, say, a system outage, that would let us track which system is out. If we were having a new user added, that could let us track the requested email address and username of the new person. Now in this case, we're going to be setting up a field to track the SLA, and we're going to use it very simply to identify those tickets that have not met their SLA. So let's add our new field and give it a name. This is going to track all of the SLAs that have not been met. Now the type here lets us define the kind of information we want to keep track of. And there's a lot of details and information we can get into. We're going to look very simply, though, at an easy list of options, a drop-down field. That'll let us tell the system what we want that field's options to be, and so that when we're working with triggers, we can have it easily set these to track where they have not been fulfilled. And we're actually going to give it just one simple option. All this field's going to track is where that has not been met. And one last thing we'll add to these fields are these two options over here on the left. They're going to be helpful because they're part of how we aggregate and report tickets with this info. The first, exported, determines whether this information is included in exported reports. So that as we're bringing out large lists of tickets for clients, and we want to see which ones have met and not met the SLA, this will include that information. And then we're going to also make it important because that means that it'll be included in our ticketing list so that we can easily create filters and look at just these tickets. Now that we have our field, if we head back to triggers, we can actually set it up to update that field. Now we've got our rules set up, but we don't have our actions yet. That's where we're going to add these in. And the first action we add is a new type. This one's going to be an update field. This will allow us to update the details of this ticket, the company we're working for, and of course any custom fields when this trigger is satisfied. And we're going to have it update our new field for the SLA not being met. We're going to have it set that field to report that it has not been met. Now, hopefully that never happens, but that'll let us know very easily now which tickets, SLAs, have not been met. Now, we of course want to make sure that we're still getting to these clients and helping them out, even if we don't quite make the SLA. So we're going to add one more rule on, just like we did before for our customer service SLA, to notify the team internally that we need to get back to the client. And we have some of the same options. We'll set that up to go out on behalf of the account manager, and just in case they don't have one, we'll send it on my behalf. But this time we're going to adjust the recipients a little bit. Rather than telling the entire company, we're going to specifically notify the support team, those folks who should be getting back to these anyway. And then we'll update the content of our notification. And just like we did with our request, again, it's helpful to always include the ID number of the ticket you're working with, a call to action, and some more information on what the ticket is in case you're out to lunch at the time. And we're using the merge fields you see here on the right to do just that. Now, because we're working in tickets, which have a little bit more content than your day-to-day request, we have a little more flexibility in our merge fields to include more detail here for our team. So let's add in a little bit more information. We'll, of course, include the client that we're working with and the contact that we're getting a hold of, but we can also include now information about what this ticket actually entails. And that's in the form of the summary or subject line and the description of the ticket. For work like this, it's also helpful to include this merge field, the link. That way, in your email, you can simply follow that link directly through to the ticket to quickly update it. So we've set up a trigger now to track our 1 hour urgent SLA. Again, that's looking at the priority level of the ticket, the status of whether we responded to them yet or not, and how long it's been there. And now we're tracking that SLA field so we can quickly see all of the tickets which have not met the SLA. We turn it on, and now Accelo works in the background to automatically monitor our tickets and let us know if we've run into any trouble. Now that's monitoring for our critical tickets. Now most times these type of ticket, where systems are out and our clients are offline, these will typically run 24/7. If it's Saturday night at 5 a.m. and all of their email servers are down, we've still got to jump in and help them out. Now the other SLA we'll often see is for more general day-to-day requests, where we have to get back to our clients, but we may not need to do that overnight. And we also have a different timing for getting back to them. It may not be 1 hour, it may be 4 hours, but we do need to get back to them. So let's set up now another trigger to track that different SLA with different ramifications. So we're going to add in our new trigger for our general inquiries. Now, a lot of the content is going to be the same. When we're setting up our rules, we're first going to look at the priority. And this time we're going to open it up a little more. We're not just looking for those that are extreme. We're actually looking for anything but extreme. And along with that priority, we're again going to be looking at the status of the ticket, because whether it's urgent or just general, that'll help us identify whether we've gotten back to our client. And of course, we'll be looking at the date to see how long it's been running and open. And in this case, we're going to open that up a little more. Since this deals with general inquiries, we typically have a little longer to get back to our clients. Let's say that's our 4-hour SLA. Now, one thing we're going to want to add that's a little new for this trigger is how we can start to identify when it's applicable. Now, again, for our system outage SLAs, those typically run 24 hours. We always have to get back to our client soon. For general inquiries like this, though, they're typically only running during business hours. At 8 p.m. or on Sunday, we don't have to get back to our client immediately. And so what we're going to do is scroll up to the top here to set this up to run just for particular days and times of day. So we're going to have it now run Monday through Friday by noting the days it should run on. And we'll also include our time range. This is how we'll define business hours for when these SLAs are tracked. And we'll go with the ideal of 9 to 5. That means that this trigger is only running and only checking for tickets that need to be addressed and responded to because the SLA has been broken during our normal business hours. Outside of that, the trigger will not run. And then lastly now, we simply set up our actions. Now first up, we're going to set up the notification, just like we did before. And to save ourselves a little time, I'm actually going to copy the same content from our last message. And we'll just update the note so that it's not dealing with our 1-hour SLA for system outages. It's dealing with our more general response. But it'll still go out to the same team members, our support team. Now, when we set up our field a few moments ago to track where SLAs have been met and have not been met, we gave it just one simple option, to track those that have not been met. What we've done now, though, is set up 2 different SLAs for our system outages and for our general inquiries. Now, when we're looking at our reports, we could infer which one is which pretty easily based on the priority. If the SLA has not been met and the priority was extreme, that's one of our system outages. But we want to take that extra piece of work out of the process. So what we're going to do is go update that field with another option. Right now we have just those that have not been met. We're actually going to edit that to track first where our system outage has not been met. And we'll add another one on now to track our general inquiry SLA. That's going to make it a lot easier when we're looking at all of our tickets to see which one is which and what's been met and what has been not. And then back in our trigger, we're going to add another action on to update that field and have it set a different value. And just like before, we'll turn that one on. So we now have 2 triggers running at the same time. One tracking our extreme priority tickets on a shorter timetable, and one tracking our more general inquiries on a longer timetable. It is quite normal to have multiple triggers running to track different SLAs at once. This is why we recommend being as specific as possible with the rules so that they don't start to interfere with each other. If we can be as specific as possible about what situation we want to track, we can ensure that doesn't happen. Now, one last area we're going to look at today is how we set up SLAs for particular clients who have particular levels of service by adding an additional field and filter on to this trigger.